Kevin Durant has finally been traded to the Houston Rockets. We're breaking down the package. Did the Suns get fleeced and how Kevin Durant actually found out? Right now, it's a breaking news edition of PHNX Suns. Psychos and sickos unite for the moment we've been waiting for what feels like months, as Kevin Durant has finally been traded from the Phoenix Suns to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the number 10 pick in this year's draft, and 5 future second-round picks. And we have a stacked crew to break it down for you today. Per usual, I'm Eric Ruby, joined by Espo, Gerald, Steven, and the Freckled Mamba behind the Mac, making all the magic happen here on a Game 7 NBA Finals Sunday. But of course, the most important people, all of you flocking to the chat for what is the biggest moment in the Suns history for the last couple of years. Kevin Durant is gone. We are here to break it down. First things first, Gerald, I have an important question. Did the Suns get fleeced?
Oh, fleeced is a strong word, but yeah, this is not the ideal return, I think, that a lot of people were hoping for. I think we have been saying for a while to set your expectations a little bit lower. They get 2 starting caliber players out of this deal, one of which I don't like the fit with Devin Booker and Bradley Beal and Jalen Green, coming off a very bad playoff performance. I do actually like Dillon Brooks on this Suns team. I think that fits with a lot of what the Suns were saying about wanting to get grittier, wanting to get more defensive minded, needing an edge. Dillon Brooks does check all of those boxes, even though, you know, as the centerpiece potentially of a Kevin Durant deal, it's a little underwhelming. You do get the number 10 pick at least, so you get to move up to the top 10 of a draft, whereas we've talked about in recent weeks, there are several prospects that could help check some boxes for the Suns, and you do add some second-round picks in the process. I know that nobody's going to be jumping for joy over 5 second-round picks, but that does matter to a team that had its draft resources depleted. At the end of the day, a Kevin Durant trade in and of itself was always going to be something of admitting failure, because when you traded for Kevin Durant, the expectation was to win titles and to compete for titles. And everybody knew that this team was not going to do it as constructed. You knew that a Kevin Durant trade was going to be taking a step back so you could take steps forward. This is kind of the painful part of that process, unfortunately. And it's sad, because you remember that playoff series, the first time that Book and KD took the floor, and how magical that was. And it's a shame they didn't get to build on it. Now the question is how they build around Devin Booker moving forward. And today we got our first bit of that answer.
Look, I don't think they're done. I think this is a first step in what will probably be a very hectic offseason. You got 5 second rounders that now can sweeten some other deals. You've heard conflicting things about whether they like Jalen Green or not. I think, to your point, Dillon Brooks fits here. You know, you wanted to get higher up in this draft. That was something that was talked about, and why there was such an onus on getting this done before the draft. So to me, I think this is step one in what will probably be multiple steps to try to figure this out. I don't know. I'm not all that shocked, because I expected what you were looking at was trying to get 2 starting caliber players and a draft pick. Like, you had, only so much leverage in this, right? And you knew that the value was going to be lesser. And then Kevin Durant backed you further into a corner by using his right. He was within his rights to say, I don't want to play in Minnesota. And there's nothing wrong with him doing that, but it changed the chess game you were playing as well. So I'm not surprised that this is the kind of haul that you got. I just kind of thought that Miami might be the team, since they've danced around KD for so long, but it's pretty obvious that Houston was the best deal that you could get.
Yeah, it sounds like this deal is very much an and then what. So you get what you get, you don't throw a fit, and you make the absolute most of what you did get in return. So It doesn't sound like the Suns have been the biggest fans of Jalen Green. I feel like most reporting that's come out since the idea of Kevin Durant going to Houston surfaced became something, and it's been something for 4 months now, essentially at this point. So I'm curious what happens with Jalen if he's shipped elsewhere, rerouted before the draft potentially. Obviously, a big week coming up. This naturally sets the tone for the day, yet alone the week to come. But yeah, it sounds like Gregory and company have their work cut out for them to make the most of the situation they're in, because they now have multiple players with positional overlap if you throw Grayson Allen in there as well, and a ton of players around the same size as well, in wingspan as well as height. So you're still in the same situation you were in last season, but with significantly less size on the inside, because you don't have a unicorn in the front court, for lack of better phrases, in Kevin Durant with the size that he brings. So the work is cut out for them.
Yeah, our guy, Flex from Jersey, is saying that he likes the deal because there's going to be more involved. Of course, if anything else comes down while we're live here, we're going to keep you up to date. And of course, we will be live Monday through Friday this week. We'll be doing live draft shows for the entirety of it, as the Suns now have the number 10 pick in the draft. And that's really the main piece that I'm looking at here. Jalen Green, I would not be shocked when he gets moved or if he gets moved to another team. I'm interested to see about who starts at small forward, if Dillon Brooks remains on this team, if it's him or if it's Ryan Dunn. But I can't imagine a better person to learn from than Dillon Brooks for Ryan Dunn, especially considering that Brooks is coming off of the best offensive season of his career, going from somebody who was just a defensive wing who couldn't shoot at all and couldn't bring any offense. There are some good parts to this trade, but I do think at the end of the day, when you look back at it and you go to the Rockets and you're not getting a Jabari Smith Jr., right? You're not getting a Tari Eason, one of those young wings that we know would have been very highly valued for the Suns and obviously highly valued for the Rockets. It's hard not to be a little disappointed in this trade. And I don't blame people for saying that they got fleeced. I'm a little underwhelmed, not necessarily because of expectations. We all know that Kevin Durant wasn't going to go for the package that the Suns gave up for him. But I was really hoping, Gerald, that they were able to get one of those young wings. They didn't, though. Is there a way that they can build around Jalen Green staying on this team if he doesn't get flipped to another team? Or is this just like a, man, we needed the asset and we just got to flip him no matter what?
It kind of feels like that, but I did talk to a league source who gave me their perspective on the Suns side of things, and said that this was kind of, in their mind, this is exactly what Ishbia said he was going to do in terms of getting younger, in terms of bringing in grit, getting 2 starting caliber players, getting younger, getting more athletic. And Jalen Green does check some of those boxes. I personally don't like the fit with Jalen Green and Devin Booker. I'm not that high on Jalen Green, the player, at this point. And I think, in fairness, it was his first playoff series. A lot of people are going to point to that, how 6 out of 7 games he was pretty bad for a Rockets team that desperately needed some offense out of one of its leading scorers and just couldn't get it outside of one really good performance that he had. So for me personally, I'm not big on this fit. I do think failing to get a Jabari Smith Jr., a Reed Shepherd, even a Tari Eason, even a Cam Whitmore throw-in would have been nice at this point. But I do think, again, you get the number 10 pick. That was probably going to be one of the biggest assets that you could possibly get back from the Rockets. I do like the Dillon Brooks fit. I do like him potentially slotting into that starting lineup. But for me, now this raises more questions, like Steven said. And then what? What is next? Because now you have Devin Booker, you have Bradley Beal, you have Jalen Green, you have Grayson Allen, you have Royce O'Neal. Even Dillon Brooks is only 6'6". You have a lot of guys in that 2 to 3 range who max out at 6'6". You need more size, even though Brooks brings the defense and the grit and all of that stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, this team was. I don't look. We are the Houston Rocket fans right now are doing what Suns fans did 2.5 years ago, right? They're dancing around like they just guaranteed themselves a championship by adding Kevin Durant. Guess what? Not a foregone conclusion for you in Houston with KD. And Suns fans are in an all-out panic, and I don't think it's as bad as Suns fans, at least many in the chat right now, seem to think. You knew that this was going to be painful to try to transition. They did not hide the fact, like you mentioned, Gerald, of what they were trying to accomplish. They accomplished at least one of those things in getting Dillon Brooks, who's going to be that hard-nosed defensive guy that's going to bring that grit, and that you're never going to question whether he's putting out effort. Now, you may not like the way that effort comes out on the court sometimes, but you're not going to ever doubt, is Dillon Brooks putting effort out on the court, right? And then Jalen Green, you're going to have to figure out. I don't know if he's the guy that gets moved. I don't know if they have something planned with Bradley Beal that they've figured out a way to either buy out or try to make a move there. There are subsequent things that will happen. We are looking at a half-finished house and trying to judge what the curtains will look like in here. So I'm not going to panic like some people, not you guys, but some of the reaction I've seen online to this until I fully understand. If you go into the season and this is what you have, and you have no power forward and no real starting center, and you're running out Dillon Brooks and Dunn, Brooks and Dunn, hey, look at that, who could be in your starting lineup, as well as Green and Book. Yeah, I'm gonna have a big problem with that. But it's June. I don't know what the rest of this is going to look like, and I think we could be in for other trades over the next few days, even before this draft.
Do we have any suitors in mind that were entertaining the idea of Jalen Green prior to the trade going down this morning?
It didn't sound like. I mean,
it's gotta be the Nets, though, right? Like the Nets,
Bulls,
like
maybe
Pelicans.
The Bulls.
Well, I do want to pass along from Bobby Marks, because of the poison pill restriction and Jalen Green's rookie extension and his contract. This trade cannot be finalized until July 6th. Right. So as much as it's breaking news, the Suns traded for these players, this trade can't go down for a couple of weeks, like right before Summer League. So there can be additions to this trade. There can be third teams added. There can be other players, pieces, assets, whatever it is, which I find pretty interesting that this came down today when it can't be finalized for a pretty long time.
Yeah. And then we're going to get another one of those, our draft pick in a Rockets hat, stupid draft day thing. I hate that. Is the dumbest thing in sports, and we're going to get to experience it again, Steven.
Well, yeah, that's why I posed the question. So it feels like there's a deal that's made, obviously, to get this across the finish line, because this is the most important part, because there's an immediate pick involved, and obviously a player with the potential extension in looming right now with Kevin Durant. The what's next part that I'm speaking to, I'm just curious if the Suns already had conversations, or if the Suns and Rockets had conversations about potentially what could be next in it, to make it make sense at the surface level part of it, which is this immediate part that we're receiving news of this morning. Feels like there's going to be a lot more news before the draft in a couple of days. And I wonder if Gregory and company plan on keeping number 10, if they end up moving it elsewhere to get maybe more picks in the first round for this immediate draft coming up early this week. I feel like there's a lot of ways it can go, and the fact that it's happening now gives them some breathing room prior to the draft starting to kind of get the wheel spinning on next, whatever's going on.
It does. There's still time to add on to the deal, to make subsequent deals. I do think we've already talked about Grayson and Royce potentially being more expendable now. Potentially having been added into 3-team framework for a deal. I'm very curious to hear back on what the plan is with Jalen Green, because I do think if there was a possibility of flipping him to a third team, it probably would have been announced as a 3-team deal. That doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way, or that they can't flip him in a subsequent deal separately from this. But it was interesting that my league source did get back to me and tell me that the Suns see it as they got 2 starting caliber players in return. Normally you don't hear that type of thing if they're planning to flip him right away. So I don't know. We did talk about a lot of 3-team frameworks for teams that would make sense for Jalen Green, like the Hornets or the Wizards or the Nets. But I feel like if the Nets were involved, especially all the buzz that we heard about them potentially being involved in 3-team talks, we would have gotten wind of that in this deal already. So I'm not entirely optimistic that they can flip him, but it doesn't mean that he's necessarily here for good.
I mean, is there a world where they think Point Book is still the answer and Jalen Green's your 2? I mean, Book was top 10 in assists last year. They may feel like that's an answer here, and then Jalen Green slots in your 2, and you kind of figure it out from there. I don't know that would be the case, but there's a lot of different things that could go on here. I just look at it and go, if the ideal lineup with Devin Booker was what we saw in 21 when they went to the finals, how do you get close to recreating that, right? And you look at and you go, Dillon Brooks could play your Mikal Bridges role, but then how do you slot everything else? How do you figure out the center position? Are you playing Dunn and Brooks at that 3 and 4, and then how does point guard net out? Like there's a lot of things still to figure out, but I don't understand the whole this team's screwed for 5 years mentality that people are heading to the bunker with as well. You still got Devin Booker. You've got more flexibility now, at least in terms of multiple pieces rather than one Kevin Durant salary. I'm not, again, it's not the worst situation to be in. It's obviously not the best. You didn't get an all-star in return, but I don't know. I don't know if it's because I'm older now and I just can't fire up the angst like everybody, but we knew they weren't going to be competing for a championship next year. After we saw the last 2 years, we knew that this was a retool year and that you were going to have to try to be good, but you're not going to be great. And what are the subsequent moves you lay for the foundation of the future? That's what we still need to see. So panic if you want,
Well, and I get what you're saying. And I'm the type of guy that's always going to try to find the best case. I'm always trying to be positive, but I'll be honest with you. And I've said this over and over again. I don't love the return of Jalen Green. I was never excited about the mainstay piece coming back in a Kevin Durant trade to have positional overlap with Devin Booker. And Devin Booker's not a point guard, but you do have the luxury of knowing that he can play it. Is it where he's ideal and where he's at his best? I don't believe so. But is it something that's possible, especially with Jalen Green bringing such a different dynamic than Bradley Beal? Athleticism-wise, he's rim pressure machine. He can chuck shots. Hopefully playing alongside a guard like Devin Booker might help temper that a little bit for Jalen Green, and maybe Green can learn a little bit from the playmaking side of things. I also think that there is something to be said about there is upside with Jalen Green. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I believe that he's going to turn into an all-star or that I believe he's going to live up to where he got drafted at, but there is a lot of raw potential there, Steven. And one thing that we mentioned when the Suns played the Rockets this year is that Jalen Green on defense is a deflections machine. And if this is a team that's trying to double down on defense with Dillion Brooks, now Jalen Green, maybe a Malawak at 10 or trading and flipping that for another defensive-minded center, Steven, there is a way to squint and see it fit. I don't think the Suns are screwed, but I do think it is okay for Suns fans to look at this and be like, I don't love it.
I mean, yeah, it's at the surface level, yes, but when you talk about basketball, not taking other people's opinions and just slapping them onto him as an end-all, be-all. This is what Jalen's 23, right? He's 23 years old. Yeah. 23 years old, just had his best season of his career. Yes, his first playoff showing wasn't what it was. But my question to everybody that likes to slap the non-playoff riser title onto a 23-year-old point guard that just finished his first playoff series, for one, did the roster and the pieces around him on offense lead to a conducive offensive system? And the answer to that question, which I think is obvious, you should understand he's not going to rise to a certain level, even at his regular season level that he showed, if the tide that he's operating in isn't one that's a sustainable offense. We talked about the lack of shooting for the Houston Rockets all season long, and especially come playoff time. If you're a drive first player and you're going against a veteran-laden team in the Golden State Warriors that have a lot of nuance to their attack, where are you going to find your lanes to create if you don't have shooting to space the floor for you? It's the same situation we talked about all season with Devin Booker in multiple respects. Obviously, the personnel is different, but the lack of system to it kind of led to the demise of ultimately the team in both respects.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I'm still going to harbor my concerns about him, and obviously a lot of us will. And most of them are about the fit, because I do think, like, we knew coming into this upcoming season, there's a possibility that, before this trade even happened, that it was going to be Book and Bradley Beal in the backcourt without a traditional point guard. Because we saw last year, you add a traditional undersized point guard, you are hurting for size. It didn't really help the Suns because Tyus Jones couldn't create the same advantages that Book could with the ball in his hands. So I know that we want to optimize Book at the 2, but as long as Beal and Grayson and all these other 2 guards are on the roster, Book manning a lot of those point guard, those ball handling, those playmaking duties was going to just come naturally. It was by necessity. So now you have this deal where you're bringing in Jalen Green, another 2 guard who's 6'4". And I think you're probably looking at a situation where Book is handling a lot of that playmaking burden. I think Gambo did tweet that the Suns intend to keep Jalen Green and play him next to Booker in the backcourt. So then the question becomes, what are we doing with Bradley Beal? Is he the most overpaid 6th man in the league, or are they going to come to a buyout and stretch away his contract? Are they going to find a deal for him? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered still.
Hey, there's a guy that could potentially play power forward for you that you could flip. You could flip Bradley Beal for, and I think Philly would give him up pretty easy. No, look, sorry. I had, like Gerald, I had to go talk to a league source as well that called, so I apologize for jumping off there. But to me, Gambo's report, and I love Gambo, and I'm not saying that it isn't true. What I'm saying is, like I talked about on Southwest Bias earlier in the week, these kind of reports happen for a reason sometimes. If you are interested in potentially flipping Jalen Green, the first thing you say is, we're not interested in trading Jalen Green, because if somebody's interested, then maybe they negotiate a little bit more. Maybe they call you, it's a dance. So I'm not going to 100% buy in, 10 minutes after this trade gets done, that Jalen Green's here for the long term, right? But I would prefer him to Bradley Beal next to Devin Booker if you're going to go 2 guards like that, and then it's the Bradley Beal question, like you said, Gerald. There's so many things we still have to figure out with all this, and I'm thinking through this, right? And I hope you guys don't mind, following me along with this. But if you look at Minnesota, if the young piece was Rob Dillingham, would you rather have Jalen Green than Rob Dillingham, right? Just because of trying to figure that out. If it was Devin Vassell or Jalen Green, or if it was Jaime Jaquez or Jovic that they were going to trade out of Miami, if you really weren't getting Ware, I still think out of that group, Jalen Green's probably the highest ceiling, the most interesting of those names. Even if it's not the perfect fit here, I think he's probably got the highest potential, which means potentially the highest value if you do eventually want to trade him, or if you keep him. So
I think that's a fair point. I do want to point out a little bit of the minutia. The issue, I think, and because we ranked individual assets for a Kevin Durant trade, and Jalen Green was pretty much at the bottom of the barrel there.
He was literally the bottom.
And the reason is just it's fit. Yes, it's the fact that the Rockets' number 2 defense was about 8 points per 100 possessions better when Green was off the floor. But a lot of it is also the contract that's coming up for him, and how much is still left on the book. So in this deal, I think the Suns sent KD's $54.7 million to Houston. They're getting Jalen Green, who next season will make $33.3 million, and Dillon Brooks at $21.1. So you're bringing back in $54.4 million. So you really only shed about $0.3 million in a Kevin Durant trade. I know a lot of us had talked about potentially shedding a lot of salary, and instead you're getting Green, who is on the books for 2, maybe 3 more seasons, because he got a $36 million player option in 2027, 2028. And then Dillon Brooks, he's only on the books for 2 years before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So for me, it doesn't free up a ton of flexibility if you are in fact keeping those guys. You're going to need to get that somewhere else with a figuring out what you're doing with Bradley Beal, with a Grayson and or Royce trade. This doesn't get you, below that second tax apron. They can still do some stuff with Cody Martin, Vasa Micic, get some contracts off the books potentially. But for me, the Green thing is, okay, he does have potential. He's young. I'm not going to give up on a kid after one bad playoff series against a smart Golden State Warriors defense. But at the same time, bringing in a guy who might not be the best fit with Book for that kind of money, it's tough to swallow compared to, a Jabari Smith Jr. or one of these younger guys that was on a more manageable salary, I think.
Yeah, let's just reset here real quick. We got 3,000 people in the chat on a Sunday morning. That is incredible. Hit that like button while you're here. If you're new around here, PHNX Sports, we go live 5 days a week with not just Suns coverage, but everything Valley sports related. We'll be live for an entire draft show, the entire first round on Wednesday and the second round on Thursday, with the Suns now having the number 10 pick. We're going to do it with the 29th pick. Now we got a whole lot more to talk about and dive into over the next couple of days. Kevin Durant has been traded to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, a first-round pick this year, the number 10 pick, and 5 second-round picks. I'll be heading out here in just a couple of minutes, turned around from on my way to Prescott to make sure that I go live with you guys. So these three will take you home. Before I get out of here, I do want to talk about the Bradley Beal of it all. Mark in the chat says the Suns will eventually be owing $140 million to shooting guards in 2026, 2027. That is a whole lot of money. Do we think that these 5 second-round picks could be attached to Bradley Beal? Is that enough value to make a team take a shot on him, or does it have to be something in the first-round category? Gerald, you are muted.
I think it could be supplemental filler, but I do think you have to attach a first at least. If like that's kind of just throwing picks at the board at that point.
Well, I mean, and you're also going to take somebody else's bad contract back at that point. Let's not act like there's the get out of jail free card by trading Bradley Beal, because you're going to have to take salary back, and nobody's giving up salary that they'd like to keep to get Bradley Beal at this point, especially if 5 second rounders are what you're sweetening with. That's like, hey, I got iced tea, I'm gonna put lemon in it to try to make it taste sweeter. That's not how it works. It's sugar that you need.
And just real quick before we get Steven's thoughts, I don't know if we went through the details yet of the picks, but just for housekeeping purposes, the 5 second rounders that the Suns are getting from Houston are the Rockets' 2032 pick, Boston's second round pick in 2030, number 59 this year. The Suns already had number 52, so now they have 52 and 59, and then 2 second rounders in 2026. But Steven, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, one of the questions that I was going to ask as I was looking and couldn't find it was clarity on the second round picks involved in particular. How many would be for this year and how many would be in recent, in terms of from this season would be coming shortly thereafter, being next season or the season after that. We're talking 2030s for a couple of those. So put them in your back pocket, the absolute back of your mind, because there's probably nothing going on with those anytime soon. But to the 50 set or 59, you said, Gerald, number 59 for this season.
Last pick in the draft.
Okay, so I'm curious what they can do with Bradley Beal. Not necessarily with the second round picks, but maybe there's a pick swap opportunity involved in some capacity. And you have a team that maybe has pieces or a piece that they don't maybe value as much because of picks that they have in mind for this upcoming draft, or potentially even free agent opportunities. So I think there might be some opportunity there for them to get creative. And needless to say, with the return that they got for Kevin Durant, they will need to be creative, because if Jalen Green is staying, obviously I assume Dillon Brooks is starting and staying as well to help kind of set a new tone for your culture. You have to shift things. And speaking to that shift, we haven't mentioned the Jordan Ott name yet, but I imagine his opinion was very heavily valued in this. You look at what made the Cleveland Cavaliers offense successful last season was that they had an elite rim pressure guy with a template for spacing and a process for spacing that directly complemented him. Now, obviously, a Jalen Green and Devin Booker front court, or backcourt rather, is not the same as a Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell backcourt, but there are some similarities in terms of traits and characteristics of those players. The drive headfirst towards the paint, get a paint touch, get a rim pressure guy in Donovan Mitchell. You have someone that can become that in Jalen Green. Obviously, multiple years younger, a lot of grooming and maturing to come with that. But you have two players that are of that similar archetype where they are slashers at heart that can shoot, and they can shoot and create for themselves. To that point, Jalen Green last season, a little over 300 possessions playing point guard for the Houston Rockets last season. Those are lineups without Fred VanVleet on the court. The Rockets had a 117 offensive rating, and they were plus 11.1 in those minutes. Like I said, that was honestly close to 400. It was like 370-something possessions. So, and that was like 27 minutes of 27% of his minutes that he spent last season was at point guard. So yes, he might not necessarily be spending time on the ball as much with Devin Booker, which I think he would naturally benefit from, a player that gets the attention Booker does, because they didn't have that in Houston last season. But that also goes the other direction because Devin Booker didn't have someone that was healthy and consistent in the lineup that could go and get rim pressure all the time, nor did they have that in the lineups where Booker was off the floor. So I think there's some trade-off there that makes for some synergy. I wasn't the highest on Jalen Green coming to the Suns because I felt like they were better pieces in terms of trade returns that they could get. But if this is what they agreed to, this is where we are. And I feel like he benefits from the system that Jordan Ott is likely going to be establishing on offense.
Yeah, I hope so. I really do hope so. Listen, I'm going to step off here in a second, so I just got a couple final thoughts here. One, Brian Gregory legacy trade, because this man is putting his reputation on Jalen Green. He is.
Come on. Okay, come on. He was put in, and I'm not a Brian Gregory defender. I thought that press conference was bad. Let's be honest. But he was put in a no-win situation. Like, that would be like if I hired you, Eric, and the first show that you had to host was Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and you would never step behind a mic before. You want to you
should have hired me, Espo. That's the
we can have that argument, but I think saying that this guy, his whole legacy, he has no legacy. Exactly. So yeah, first trade. Oh, God.
Okay, listen. Okay,
get it? Maybe this will be the only big deal he gets to make. I don't know, but look.
No, I get what you're saying, but
what are you, Stephen A. Smith?
This is the foundational piece, right? If they're going to keep this guy and they're going to pair him next to Devin Booker, that's a big risk. And you got to hope it pays off either in bumping his value up and being able to flip him or actually having a long-term backcourt mate with Devin Booker. I'm not confident in those things, but I'm going to give my grades. I want to hear y'all's grades. Let's put a poll in the chat to get overall grades on the trade before I step out here. My lovely wife has been very patient with me as we turn around from Prescott to do this. So I'm giving this a C- with a big chance to rise up. There is a chance that you could do revisions and that you can get this up higher. The number 10 pick is a great asset. There is a chance that becomes a foundational building block to this team next to Devin Booker for the rest of his career. We have seen all-stars and superstars go with the 10th pick. Plus, you might be able to package some of the other draft capital you have, and maybe you can move up even more, or you can move up in the second round. Plus, you still have the 29th pick. You are loaded with 4 draft picks, 2 in each round and 1 in the top 10 in this year's draft. That's not nothing. Dillon Brooks is not nothing. He's going to bring grit to this team. He's going to bring personality, and he's going to bring this idea of toughness that Jordan Ott, Matt Ishbia, Brian Gregory have been preaching that this team desperately lacked, and we were lamenting about last season. Nobody threw a punch last season. They might this season with Dillon Brooks in that locker room. Right. And then 5 second-round picks, there is some flexibility there. My main thing is if you can use that to get off of Bradley Beal, if you can draft a foundational piece with 10, and if Jalen Green develops into something or you move them, there's a chance that this can get bumped up because you weren't going anywhere with Kevin Durant. You had to trade him and you were backed into a corner. So I'm going to step off here. I want to hear all of y'all's trades, grades, and everything in the chat. Sound off. Shout out to all of you for jumping in on a Sunday, and I will talk to you all again very, very soon.
Thank you, Eric. I want to get your guys' grades for the deal as well. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us on a Sunday. Please make sure to leave a like. It helps us a lot. Leave us a 5-star review if you are enjoying us. Or even if you're not and you're just here, leave us a 5-star review because it helps. Steven, I'll go to you first. What would you grade this trade? And I know that trade grades are tough because a lot of the times they're spur of the moment. We have no idea how it's going to pan out down the road. We don't know what subsequent moves are going to follow. But gut reaction here, immediate reaction, what would you grade it?
Yeah, because of the value and the optionality that the number 10 pick gives you that you just simply did not have in any capacity prior to this trade happening, in addition to the potential of Jalen Green and the three-point shooting and toughness prowess of Dillion Brooks, I don't think it could be anything less than a B-.
Okay.
And I see avenues that it could work on the court with Jalen Green and Devin Booker. Obviously, it's not the most maybe natural per se because they're both kind of more combo guards than one being established as a 1 and a 2. And obviously with the size part of it as well when you bring that in. But I feel like you can see where they're trying to get to in terms of the roster that they're looking to build for Jordan Ott in season 1. And because of that and what the potential of deals to come gives them based off of the picks that they got in the second round in particular, it gives them some options. So I'm going B-.
I think the only real grade that you can give it is an incomplete, but I know that's not the exercise, right? So at best, it's a C- to me. And if there's no subsequent larger moves the rest of the offseason, it's an F. Because if this is the big move you make, if this is the plan, the big plan, and you run into the season with where we're sitting now, it's an F, because you're not. I don't feel very good about it, but I refuse to believe that this is it, and that there are subsequent dominoes that you're looking at to try to figure out. But if you go in with Devin Booker, Jalen Green, Bradley Beal, and freaking Grayson Allen all on your roster, and then you don't really address any of the other major issues in a big way, then it's an F. And I will agree with everybody that the deal was misguided. But right now, it's a C- because I don't know what the subsequent stuff is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm probably in the C category right now, C or C-, and it's going to depend on what comes next for me as well. Like, there has to be a subsequent idea lined up for Bradley Beal, whether that's buying him out and stretching and waiving, whether that's trading him somewhere. I don't think it's tenable to have Jalen Green, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker on the same team next year and expect Booker to remain patient. We knew that this upcoming season was going to be a step backward in terms of expectations. This organization still believes that they're going to compete for a playoff spot, but in terms of championship or bust expectations, everybody involved knows that that's not going to be the case this upcoming year. But if you have those 4 shooting guards on your team, not to mention undersized wings in Dillon Brooks and Royce O'Neal, as good as they are at what they do, you are asking for a sub 35 win season in my mind. So there has to be more lined up. I'm going to bear that in mind when I give this grade, because I do like what Dillon Brooks brings in terms of checking a lot of the boxes of the identity that they want to establish, being more defensive minded, tougher, grittier. I appreciate all of that. I don't think Jalen Green is as bad as he's been made out to be, but I do think combined with that contract, he kind of feels like a negative asset right now. And he's going to have to prove a lot of people wrong that he can fit with Devin Booker. The number 10 pick is the most exciting part of the deal by far to me. And we'll obviously spend maybe a little bit of time at the end of this show and then probably all of tomorrow discussing the prospects that they should be looking at with that number 10 pick. But there are some decent options on the wing and at the center spot, which we know they desperately need at number 10, that I think could help them out. So I'm going to go with a C on this one.
Can we be honest here? I mean, why are some people acting like this was a not anybody here, but again, the chat and what I'm seeing on social, as if this was a championship contender the last 2 years, right? We saw this team perpetually get worse. I mean, there were 10 games under 500 last year. So A, you weren't a good team, and B, you weren't dealing from a position of strength. So this, oh my God, I can't believe you were 10 games under 500. You were going to likely pace that way again if you did not do anything, if not worse, because of the toxicity of a locker room. That's the thing I think people lose in this. And I'm not saying trading Kevin Durant is necessarily an addition by subtraction, but it is when you get rid of the KD stands. So at least we don't have to deal with that crap anymore.
Some of them weren't bad. I will shout out the KD stands that weren't bad.
KD fans, some of them, fine. KD
some of them were rough. I won't miss them. But you bring up a point that I think we should touch on, the Kevin Durant of it all, because we have talked obviously a lot about the Suns' perspective, as we should. But I do think we should take a minute to just reflect on the Kevin Durant era, and potentially even his fit in Houston if you want. But like I said off the top of the show, any Kevin Durant trade was going to be admitting failure of a certain sort. It was going to be closing the door on one era that you went all in on, and I would still defend that trade to this day. I don't think that Kevin Durant trade was the problem. Even what you had to give up to get him, we saw Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, what they can do in a playoff stage in that first year that they had together. They just didn't have anybody else around them, and the moves that they made to put players around them were the incorrect ones. They didn't pan out. They didn't work out. And so now you are at a place where you have to reset, and you are you're going to naturally take an L in a deal like this where you're giving up Kevin Durant. And it's a shame because I will say for me, I know a lot of people are going to look at this Kevin Durant era of Suns basketball as a major disappointment. It's going to be, I don't think it's going to be quite on par with like the Shaq Suns, but it's pretty far up there in terms of expectations and disappointment. The difference is Kevin Durant absolutely balled out while he was here individually. He's going to get prescribed a lot of the blame as one of the leaders of the team. His leadership always comes into question, all of that. I will just say for me, I never got the sense that his leadership was a problem in the locker room. I wish him the best moving forward because we know what that man can do, what he's capable of. And for me personally and professionally, it was the unique opportunity of a lifetime so far in my career to be able to cover a guy like that. I've never covered an athlete like that has this passion and this knowledge for the game that he's willing to share with us when we would ask him questions, the way he would hold people accountable to make sure that we were on our P's and Q's when we did ask him a question. You can't come in at Kevin Durant with some uninformed bad question because he will tear it apart. And I think that made a lot of us better. So I know that a lot of Suns fans probably don't care about this, but I think that knowledge and love for the game is very rare in this league. And to have it be coupled with an all-time great was something special. I will miss watching him play in Phoenix on a nightly basis. And I think a lot of Suns fans are in that same boat. It is a pity that this didn't work out. But I do really like the fit of him in Houston. I'm glad he gets to go to one of the destinations he wanted to be with Ime Udoka, Royal Ivy, and on a team that needs his offense explicitly and didn't have to, completely slash their entire roster to get him. So I am happy for him. I am sad for Suns fans today because you think back to that Clippers game where Devin Booker was going off and you see that picture of Booker holding the follow through and Kevin Durant screaming to the rafters and afterwards saying it was spiritual. We deserved a lot more than what we got out of this era. And it's a pity that this is how it's ending so soon.
Yeah, I mean, he averaged 26 and some change for the team, 50, 40, almost 90% from the free throw line. In terms of looking at the efficiency for a player that gets the attention that he gets, and he just simply could care less about the attention that he gets because all he sees is the back of the rim, and that's typically where a lot of his shots landed and went in. The adaptability and willingness to play a different style of play, getting off the ball in the Monty Williams edition when he was in the playoffs in particular, which had people asking questions, to which he always, to your point, Gerald, had an equal and direct answer. Even if he doesn't have the ball, it's coming with a certain type of attention and it's creating space for everybody else to do what they do best. To the Frank Vogel era, and him taking on a little bit more usage in a unique way, playing a little bit more out of the post than he did at any point prior to his time with the Suns in that season and making the most out of it. And then obviously this season, coming into it, shooting more threes, being challenged, literally challenged by Mark Budenholzer, and he just simply said, bet. It had one of the best three-point shooting seasons of his career. All-time great on the court, but also all-time great in front of the microphone, to Gerald's point. I wish we had more athletes like that, like Kevin Durant in particular, that would not just be willing to talk basketball, but could also recollect in real time what you might be asking and speaking to him about, point to it in detail, and speak to it in a way that even a novice could understand what he's talking about. Those little things really matter, and I think he got a lot of attention this past season for his media relations and how willing and open he was and candid he was in his interview processes. So all-time great on the court, all-time great in the interview side of things, which matters for media members. And I think his shoes are impossible to fill, and the Suns are going to be in a retool largely because of those things.
Look, Kevin Durant is one of the greatest players we've seen on the court from an individual perspective for the Phoenix Suns. He's right up there with anybody on the list. I've always said he's a top 10, probably top 5 guy in NBA history, especially if you're talking scoring. There is no doubt about Kevin Durant's greatness. And when you look back, the trade to bring him here from Brooklyn will be viewed as a complete failure. I don't think that's because of Kevin Durant himself. He came and did everything that he could have, right? And I don't think you can put that at his feet. Some people will. That's your prerogative. I think this, and I've said it before, I think this was just one of those relationships. When you got in it, it didn't work. And you both looked at each other and went, this isn't going to end up in a ring. So why don't we part ways and be done with it, and we both can move on in our separate directions. I don't think there's anything wrong with a breakup like that. Sometimes it's healthy to just admit that, right? And that's where I feel like this is. Kevin Durant will always be one of the best talents we've seen. He was always very thoughtful, as you guys mentioned, in his answers. There's no doubt that he has a mind for basketball that very few do, right? Just didn't work here. And now it's time to move on. And of course, you didn't get exactly what you gave up. But that's just the fact of it. And you knew you wouldn't, because Kevin Durant is now 37 on an expiring contract, and you had very little leverage. You backed yourself into the corner. You wound up where you were, but it's not Kevin Durant's fault in any way where you wound up. It just was a bad mix across the board for the Suns team.
And I will say, to your point, I think a lot of people are going to frame this as, you know, a mutual parting or whatever. And I think to some extent they obviously work together. The Suns were the ones that wanted this. Mm-hmm. Kevin Durant wanted to be here. So I don't want to see anybody perpetuating the myth, and not saying that you were doing that, Espo, but I don't want to see people perpetuating this myth that continues to follow Kevin Durant, that he always forces his way out of teams that he's not winning with. That's not what happened in Brooklyn until he absolutely had to, because Kyrie and Harden were the wrong running mates that admittedly he chose. And that's not what happened here in Phoenix. And I will say, I think that there should be a focus on moving forward. Like, there's going to be a hunger. I think Jalen Green is probably very well aware of what's been said about him after the playoffs, of what Houston thinks of him, including him in this deal, and of what he's probably going to hear from Suns fans coming here. Dillon Brooks, I mean, he checks that hungry box automatically. And a number 10 pick, draft pick, those guys come in hungry. So you talk about a head coach that they were looking for in Jordan Ott, first-year head coach. They wanted to go away from retreads, from coaches with championship experience, and bring in someone who was hungry. You look at the return from this Kevin Durant trade, you're bringing in at least 3 guys who are going to be hungry. I do think that matters. And I'm not suggesting, because I've seen people say, like, oh, Kevin Durant came here and Devin Booker lost his hunger, he lost his edge, he doesn't even look like the same player. First of all, that's insulting to Kevin Durant and the locker room dynamic. Second, that's insulting to Book himself, to suggest that he's not a grown man responsible for his own motivation. And third, it's just not true. But I do think there is something to the effect of Kevin Durant loves playing basketball. He could be playing in Siberia and he would be happy. He's won his championships. I think bringing in younger players who fit Book's timeline a little bit better, who are going to be hungry, and not that KD wasn't hungry, but bringing in those guys who haven't gotten to that point, I think that does matter for this Suns team.
Well, and I think it changes, it doesn't change Devin Booker, but that chip on the shoulder, Devin Booker has seemed to operate better in an FU mode than in other ways at times, right? Like, he comes out if he feels slighted and performs at some of the best levels we've seen. So I think we are going to see a highly motivated Devin Booker, because of everybody going, well, they're doomed for 5 years. Just trade him for whatever you can get and let's move on, right? If you're Devin Booker, you see that and you go, I'm one of the greatest Suns of all time. I've stayed loyal here. I'm going to prove some of you wrong. And does that carry you to next year to the highest of highs? Probably not. But I think we're going to see Devin Booker reemerge as that top 10 kind of guy, top 15 kind of guy in the league, where there's no doubt about, who he is and why he is. And I think you're right. A guy, you can't tell me like Dillon Brooks isn't going to have a chip on his shoulder being traded away from the Rockets. Jalen Green, obviously, they're going to be younger. They're going to be hungrier. And I don't think we're going to have any night next year where we go, well, geez, they look like they didn't really try or really put forth any effort. They really looked bored out there, which to me is a win from where you were last year. I know that's a small win and people don't like the small wins in these kind of situations. But to me, not having to watch completely, dispassionate basketball is going to be a win in my book.
Yeah, we've heard Jordan Ott speak to wanting to be wanting to establish a defense that's attack first. Dillon Brooks naturally he's self-explanatory. You hear the name, you know what comes with it. like I've talked about, especially before, people want to speak to the antics first before speaking to his impact on defense. His antics have impact because his defense is to the level that it is, and that's elite. And it's been that for 4 seasons now, where he's been in that space of 3-and-D type of defenders, and he can guard multiple positions, can guard 1 through 4 comfortably, can switch and guard all 4 in one possession if you need him to. You don't get opportunity to play in Ime Udoka's system if you don't have a give a care factor about the defensive end of the floor. That's not something the Suns had comprehensively in any capacity last season, but that's not to the fault of the roster. I think it's to the fault of the roster built. And that's an indictment to the establishing of that team going into last season. So I don't imagine that's ever going to be an issue for this team going forward as long as Dillon Brooks is on the floor, because all of the things that he brings in a non-skill oriented style of dynamic to the team, it comes with accountability, and it comes with a certain floor that it's going to have to be at when he's on the court with the team, because he's going to get that out of people. We talked about leadership coming in numerous forms. He's not the literal sense of it that most people think of, but because of the accountability that comes with his presence on the floor defensively, that indeed is leadership. In addition to that, Jalen Green, we talk about all the negatives that people want to speak to. Again, you don't stake significant minutes in Ime Udoka's system if you don't play defense. Last season, he had his best defensive season of his career. That's directly aligned with Ime Udoka. He comes into their team last season or the season before last, and he establishes a new tone, and everybody has to fall in line. And we see Jalen Green, like Eric mentioned, and we've spoken to multiple times throughout the regular season, turn into this deflection demon, where he's just finding ways to have impact and uses plus wingspan and athleticism as a weapon on defense. That's something Jordan Ott is going to certainly look to lean into a lot, and it's going to give the Suns a different feel on the defensive end before speaking to anything on offense.
Stephen, I think you've made some fantastic points in terms of both the system that Jordan Ott, you made that point earlier about the system that Jordan Ott helped run in Cleveland and how that might work with Green and Book. And then what you just said there makes a lot of sense. And look, I think Dillon Brooks, the reaction to him is very similar to what we saw the reaction with Grayson Allen when he came here. I can't stand, or even Chris Paul to an extent. Let's be honest. As great as Chris Paul is, there before he came here, there was a stigma from Suns fans that, I can't stand that guy for everything he pulls. Not to the level of Brooks or Grayson, but I think he's one of those guys when you see the effort for your team, it shifts, right? And it changes your perspective. And I hope that is the case, because it certainly became the case for CP3 and Grayson. And if Dillon Brooks can come in and be a guy that helps you set that tone, that helps lift everybody's defense because of the effort and what he does out there, then I think you can look past some of these other things and some of these things that look like crazy antics from the outside. Maybe that's cope, but that's just kind of, experience has taught me that maybe that's what we need to look at here.
It's a little cope, but people use the word cope like it's not a positive tool for your own mental well-being.
It's a safety tool, right?
First of all, coping is a healthy thing to do. Second of all, I think you're going to have to, right? Because if this team does have Dillon Brooks and Grayson Allen on its roster, Suns fans are going to have to like these guys on their own team, because nobody else is going to. Like, the Suns have already been an unlikable team from the outside perspective. They're very much that with Grayson and Dillon Brooks on the roster currently. And as we've mentioned, like Grayson, I think Grayson understands that a lot of the things that he did in the past were mistakes. I know Bulls fans hate him for the Caruso thing. Grayson stands by the fact that was an accident. It was not intentional to hurt him in that way. But yeah, you're going to have to get used to being the villains, except not like the 64 win team that was the villains just because they were kicking the crap out of everybody. They're the villains because people are actively rooting for certain guys on this roster to fail. So we're going to have to come to grips with that. We're going to have to hope that Dillon Brooks' shooting holds up, because as we mentioned, he did have a career year shooting the ball, 39.7% on a career high 6.3 attempts. But throughout his career, he's been around 35, 36%. He only has one other season where he shot better than 37% from three. So you want that to hold up. You look at his shooting numbers from the floor, they are really not great. I think he's like 41 or 42% for his career. But what he provides defensively is going to be the main thing for you in terms of setting a new tone. And I think that is the exact type of piece that you need around Devin Booker in particular, because we know that Book has a lot to shoulder on the offensive end. We know that defensively he needs to be a lot better than he's been the last 1 or 2 years. But if you can have an enforcer type guy next to him who can help set that tone and it not be dependent on Devin Booker and Kevin Durant setting your defensive tone, or a rookie like Ryan Dunn, I do think that can help you to a certain extent.
Yep, you look at the best rosters and the best versions of Devin Booker that we've seen, and he's had a player cut from that cloth, and I call them elite level blue collar guys. PJ Tucker first and foremost before anybody else, and then you transition to Jay Crowder and the high level of winning and sustaining at that level that we saw with them, and the way that they raised the bar for the defensive end and doing the intangible or doing the periphery things on offense to keep the offense afloat. Those two types of players are the exact archetype that Dillion Brooks is. And Dillion Brooks is a player no different than those two that offers something past just knocking down catch and shoot three-point opportunities. But to start there, 18 players took over 400 catch and shoot threes last season. His 40% clip was 9th in the NBA last season. So that's an elite volume of guys taking shots, and that's an elite efficiency in terms of making the opportunities that are being created for him. You look at him playing with guards like Jalen Green last season and Fred VanVleet, and obviously from the paint inside out, Alfred Şengün. He doesn't necessarily have maybe the diversity of those looks that he would be created last season, but we've seen Devin Booker and the attention that he gets and his ability to grow and pass and offer that to counter it. Dillion Brooks being spaced one pass away on the other side gives Devin Booker a player that can create in that advantage. And to that point, not just the shooting for Dillion Brooks, very underrated passer. He's a player that can bring the ball up the court to alleviate pressure, gets you into your offense efficiently with more time on the clock than if you had Devin Booker going against the grain for 90 to 94 feet, which we saw a lot last season from the good defensive teams. So having a player that can not just be a specialist, but has multiple little skills that you can lean into. You can throw it into the post to Dillion Brooks, and you can get Devin Booker and Jalen Green in movement, screening for one another. Split action, as they call it. We saw them do it in Houston last season a couple of times with Jabari Smith Jr. and Jalen Green, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's something the Suns can certainly lean into. And then the other big thing for me with Dillion Brooks, you talk about the defense. He is a good rebounder, a very good rebounder for his position, for his size. And it comes with, again, an accountability that the Suns just didn't have last season, not just playing defense, but also putting a period on your defensive possessions and going after the ball. I think that edge, that elite blue-collar dynamic is something this team missed last season. And there's a new sheriff in town as far as blue-collar boys go. So we're going to have some fun with that going forward, and specifically documenting the impact that has on this roster in Jordan Ott's first season.
Yeah, Gerald, you bring up that, the Suns are going to be the villains. Nice guys have finished last for 57 seasons here, whatever it has been. I don't care. Like, zig a little bit when you've zagged most of your life. I'm ready. Let's go for a villain arc. Let's be the most hated team, with some edge and some toughness, and see where that leaves you. But I want to get your feeling, both of you guys, in terms of how much of this came down to also looking at Kevin Durant wanted that max extension, obviously wanted that money that was coming to him. And did you really feel like you could invest that in a guy that was going to be 40 by the time that deal ended up, where in this, you split that money into a couple contracts, obviously younger guys, maybe it gives you more flexibility if you feel like you have to, start making other moves to jettison things if we get to that point. That, I think, has to be taken into consideration as well when you're looking at it, too, is just the amount of money you were going to have to invest in a Kevin Durant that was going to be 40 by the end of the time you finish paying it.
I think that's an interesting point. I can say, based on what I had heard and based on my feeling around the situation, I don't think that would have been an issue if the team hadn't been an absolute disaster this year. I think individually speaking, like all the sources that I talked to last summer when the Suns didn't give him a 1-year extension, remember he was eligible for that extension. The reasoning that I was given by multiple Suns sources was that they were waiting for this summer when he was eligible for a 2-year extension, because then for Kevin Durant, he could get paid extra, have an extra year tacked on. And for the Suns, they wanted to do right by him and extend him for as long as possible. Then this season happened and it was a train wreck. And I think they were met with reality that it just wasn't going anywhere. So I think the concern there was less about his age and whether he'd still be able to perform at Kevin Durant levels that late into his career, as it was like, why are we tying up 2 extra years of max money into a guy when this situation isn't working? It's time to pivot. I think Matt Ishbia said it at his press conference. Like, if something's not working, patience is not one of my strong suits. I will pivot. And I think this was the ultimate pivot, if you will.
Isn't that part of why you don't sign with a contract extension, though, too? Because you want that out if things went sideways for a second straight season. So I don't know. Again, you were never going to get the value that some people wanted in this. I'm personally, I don't know about you guys, I'm glad it's just over.
I am too.
I'm just like, now you can move on and you can go, okay, what is actually going to happen? How will basketball look like under Jordan Ott? I cannot wait for Steven to break down film and tell me this is what the offense is going to look like with these pieces that have been added. This is what this team's going to play like, because we have been stuck in this KD loop since February trying to figure this out. And I am glad that we have emerged out of it. I'm glad KD will have an opportunity to win a title. And I'm interested in seeing what the Suns are moving forward at the very least.
Yeah, I feel like that's a move that you make if you're not sure you want to invest in him going forward, for sure. But my question is kind of piggybacking off of that, which is something I was mentioning, why I thought the Suns could get maybe more than people thought they would if Durant was going to Houston. And that's Houston pushing the Fred VanVleet extension deadline back to July. Now, I'm not as privy to their books because of the actual trade that happened today. I kind of had an idea of different things going on. So I wonder, especially with the Lumen extensions going after next season for Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, how does that affect Fred VanVleet getting the money that is looming for him with his deadline that's coming sooner than KD's trade, or sooner than KD's extension, as well as the 2 younger guys? So I wonder what their books look like with that and how they're kind of incorporating that into their thought process going forward. They got some decisions to make. They also don't have a shooting guard, a literal shooting guard that's on their roster right now. So I imagine they probably tried to keep those 2 to then put themselves in position to make another move as well. So they got some bookkeeping things to kind of tend to themselves on their end. But them having Kevin Durant with those 2 young wings, obviously Fred VanVleet likely to come back in some capacity, still having Şengün, having brought back in Steven Adams, that's a team that has expectations now. Last season, there was a lot of element of surprise, them catching people off guard. Their offensive outlook now shifts when you bring Kevin Durant in. I'm curious what that looks like for them going into next season. They don't give up all of their defense. I think maybe the piece that identified most with the style of play that Udoka wanted to get to was Brooks. But I think naturally you lean more into Eason in particular for that, to bring some of that, some of those intangibles. But that's a team that should finish no worse than top 4 in the West now, right?
Well, I mean, Steven, look, I know a team that has like 6 shooting guards that might be able to help out Houston.
You thought.
Bradley Beal, you are our rocket.
You thought. That's why I thought there was a natural partnership there. You got it.
Yeah. No, that's going to be interesting for Houston. Any final thoughts before we kind of transition out of here? I think we should probably spend a little bit of time talking about maybe prospects at number 10. But anything in terms of the actual trade, Kevin Durant, the Rockets, that we have not covered before we move on to that?
Look, I know it's not popular to say this about a guy leaving town, but I hope KD does have success in Houston. I'd love to see him. If the Suns can't win a title, I'd love to see KD do it, just so he can shake some of that negative, talk that's been around him, because he only got it in Golden State. So, I have never had a problem with KD, and I want to see him have success. It's some of the peripherals that came along with it, if I ever seem bitter about that guy. So,
yeah.
I'm very curious to see what the fit for Fred or for Durant in Houston looks like. Him and Udoka have had many back and forths in a obviously respectful manner, but Udoka being able to maybe send Durant's offense off script more than any other coach has in a sustained manner with the ways that his defense has been able to shapeshift around Durant. Durant not having to worry about that, but Durant also being able to kind of learn from Udoka potentially, and when teams try to implement things that Udoka did, having direct counters to that. I think naturally the answer to most of that is going to lie in how they fill out the rest of their roster, getting shooting, literally shooting in any capacity in the room. I think they need it even more so now than they did prior to the trade happening today. But you can do a lot worse than having a problem-solving piece in Kevin Durant to navigate clutch minutes for with your team. You just have to get to that point. And when you get there, which it doesn't seem like they'll have an issue getting to the postseason next year, then you just roll the dice at that point. You have one of the 15 greatest playoff performers of all time. That's a nice little back pocket thing to have as you kind of navigate the first 3.5 quarters of playoff games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating for them. The number 2 defense in the league from last year just added Kevin Durant to replace a guy whose shooting percentages were like 42, 35, something like that. Kevin Durant's been a walking 50, 40, 90 pretty much for the last couple of years. So that is going to be a scary team. They didn't have to give up a ton. They gave up some significant pieces, but they didn't have to give up a ton of their rotation. Got to keep Jabari Smith, which for me is the biggest bummer of this deal from Phoenix's perspective, not being able to get Jabari, Tari, or who's the third guy? Reed Shepherd was kind of a bummer for me. But let's move on to the number 10 pick. A little bit of hope, because the draft always provides optimistic hope for every fan base, no matter where you are picking. The Suns now have the number 10 pick. They have the number 27 pick. They also have 2 second rounders at number 52 and number 57. Later this week, I'll be covering draft targets for all of those ranges. But for today, number 10, who are you guys liking at that spot? We did talk earlier in the week about potential targets at number 10. I think Carter Bryant and Cayman Malawak were 2 of the common ones. Let's start there. And then I know, Steven, I think you had a few other options as well. If the Suns could get Malawak or Carter Bryant, if both of those guys are there at number 10, are you looking for help on the wing with the U of A guy, or are you looking for a center, someone who's relatively newer to basketball, but has a lot of raw talent and upside?
Yeah, for me, I would be very curious what Jordan Ott and company think about the center room for the Suns. Does he see Nick Richards as a piece that's going to be a part of his front court going forward, even obviously more likely in a reserve sense? Does he see Oso Ighodaro as a piece that's going to be a part of his front court going forward? Those are looming questions. And that kind of leads me to a point that I didn't bring up when we were talking about the trade, but the Suns talked about wanting a starting caliber center. A starting caliber center this, a starting caliber center that. We want a starting caliber center. And then we see the trade happen this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine they're looking at the center group in particular with the draft. If it is that they actually keep the number 10, I still personally feel like they might trade back potentially if there's a trade that's on the board that gives them a starting caliber center and allows for them to have some optionality in the first round in addition to already having the 29 pick at their disposal as well. But looking at number 10, I would imagine they like Malawak a lot, just because everything that he did at Duke, he's in the NBA system on the offensive end. Defensively, they do a lot of things that NBA teams do as well. He's groomed, even though he's younger and kind of late to basketball, he's groomed in terms of understanding what an NBA defense is going to look like, the demands that's going to have on the player, and how to kind of coincide and obviously even bring his own style of impact to that. Naturally, it's going to come with a ton of growth. And I think that him being with the team that is retooling alleviates some of the pressure that if a Durant was around, obviously it was impossible to have Durant in the 10. But if you have a win-now roster and you're bringing a starting center into it, that's a different type of pressure than if it's, okay, we're just kind of going with the flow. We have expectations, but we're going with the flow in the sense that you have more room for error than you did if we were looking to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy going into next summer. So I'd imagine Malawak is at the top of their big board, if you will, at this moment in time.
Yeah, it better be a big board. It better be power forwards and centers that they're looking at. And I think you bring it up. It may not just be simply who can you take at 10. It's who may be available around the league that you could trade for, with some of these assets. It could be, do you like a guy that might be in the upper range in that draft? You package everything that you have in terms of draft capital this year and maybe something else to move up. Like, I think you got optionality now to try to figure out how you fill in that hole at 4 and 5 in that lineup. And that's what I like about it. We know how much draft is a crapshoot, but if you look at it, at the two finals teams, right? I don't think there's a guy that was drafted top 9 on either roster, right? So to think that there's zero value that you can find at a 10 that can have a big impact, I think might be a vast oversight by some people. So maybe you do stay there. You find the guy you really like at center, and he's a guy that stays around for a long time. But if they go anything other than big at 10, I think a lot of people are going to lose their mind just as bad as they did today. But Wednesday is certainly a lot more interesting now than it was 24 hours ago, because it's going to be interesting that first round now that you got two picks and you're in the lottery. And guess what? I guess we officially have tanked appropriately because you got the 10th pick because of last year. So congrats, everybody.
They did it. So you don't want a shooting guard at number 10 is what you're saying.
Hey, you know what? I mean, unless alignment means all 15 guys on the roster play the same position. Well, look,
they're maybe aligned at 6'5".
Yeah, there's no variation in height, no real variation in skill set. Maybe that is alignment for the Suns. But hey, we didn't wind up with a Michigan State guy, so win, right? No Michigan ties in the deal, right?
You just wait for Jace Richardson to go number 10. Yeah. No, I think Malawak makes a ton of sense at number 10. I liked Carter Bryant as a prospect. I probably would have maybe leaned more Malawak if they were able to trade up before this trade, and now especially bringing in Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks, I feel even more strongly about that. I do want to submit another option though, and Steven, I want to tee you up about Cedric Coward because I know he was high on your board as well. But before we do that, I do want to throw out another big man option there who's kind of a polarizing prospect, Danny Wolf. That is someone that the Suns did work out pretty early in the process. He is polarizing because he's very unique in terms of being a great passing big, kind of a guy who can be a central hub on offense, but his decision-making can be a little erratic. He's got a high handle. He does have a turnover problem, but he did shoot very well in draft workouts with teams and impressed teams in that way. And that was kind of one of the questions that he was going to have to prove. I think he shot 34% from 3 last year and like 59% on free throws. So there were questions about the shooting. But much like Ryan Dunn, if he's a riser because he's been shooting really well in all these draft workouts, that could change his projection potentially, even though feedback on him has been kind of mixed to this point. So just wanted to float that name out there, not offering an opinion either way on it, but that is a guy that the Suns, we do know they have worked him out, and he is projected somewhere in that kind of late lottery range.
And to that point, Gerald, Espo, you can cover your ears. And please don't listen. That's a Michigan guy. So you're not getting away from what you just mentioned. You were hoping they were doing with that. So there's that part of it. But Danny Wolf is very much a high caliber trade back option if the Suns decide to trade back late in the draft. I'm really walking on eggshells, not trying to mention another team that has multiple late round picks that will love the pick swap, and we'll give you players that you can fill out your starting roster or your starting lineup around Devin Booker and Jalen Green potentially, or Devin Booker at least. We'll get to that throughout the week. I'm sure there'll be more news on that front, but there are options on the table for the Suns, to the point that I mentioned, to what Gerald's mentioned as well, and Espo even too. So I'm Gerald, you want to get to the other two names that I've kind of had in mind?
Yeah, let's tee those up. Okay,
so the Malawak pick, that's definitely in the 10 range, if not potentially sooner. I've seen them as high as like 7 on most mock draft boards right now. But the two names that I'm looking at are both wings. They're at varying heights, but they both have diverse shot profiles that also care about the defensive end and can use their athleticism and size to be impactful there, and have shown to do so on the collegiate level. And that's Neek Clifford and also Cedric Coward. We can start with Coward because he's shot up draft boards over the last 2.5 to 3 weeks as he's gotten through workouts and they've gotten a chance to interview him. And one of the things that stands out most about Coward, no different than with Oso Ighodaro last season, the way he speaks the game has really stood out to a lot of people that are looking at him and considering him with whatever picks that they might have. That in tandem with his season that he showed in his senior year, albeit abbreviated because of injury, what he showed, it kind of piggybacked off of the tone that he set in his junior year. And it brought a lot more NBA-ready context to kind of assess his film from. A player that can score in the post and do so effectively and efficiently. A player that grew as a playmaker off of the scoring attention that he received. And a player that could score at all three levels and do so with the ball or without the ball. And if you're talking about a younger piece that's going to be as a wing coming in to play with Devin Booker potentially, those are all of the things that you want to see. And a lot of those things can be copied and pasted, but to a higher level, literally in terms of height and size, but also for the ability to score the basketball in particular with Nick Clifford. I think those are two wing names that we'll hear more of the Suns being aligned with going into Wednesday's draft, if it is that they're not going center at 10 and they maybe potentially trade back.
Yeah, Coward, 6'6", 7'2" wingspan, very smooth, fluid athlete. Sam Vecini, who does a great job over The Athletic, wrote that he saw him work out in Los Angeles in April and couldn't overstate how good he was in that workout. He's the guy that only played 6 games this year at Washington State, but was pretty lights out in those 6 games and has been a significant riser throughout the pre-draft process. He has impressed teams, not only like Steven said, with the way that he speaks the game, but his individual workouts, how everything is in one kind of fluid, clean motion with his jumper. And he has some explosiveness. He has length. So as much as the Suns did bring in wings, and we're kind of sick of talking about 6'5", 6'6" guys at the 2 and the 3 spot, you don't turn down a guy if you feel like he's a long-term fit for your program just because you have Jalen Green and Dillion Brooks now. Espo, any draft thoughts?
Look, to your point, I know I'm joking that it has to be a power forward or center. I mean, it feels like that. But if there's a guy on the board that you feel like is high value that will make you better in the long term, you have to ignore the noise, right? You have to ignore, guys like me that are couch GMs, and look at what makes the most sense for the future, right? This year could be messy with your roster as you try to figure that out, but you've got to find the right talent around Devin Booker for long term. So 10 could be a wing, a 6'7" guy, and that could just be the case because you feel it's best. The question is, do you trust the Suns scouting department and front office to find that guy? And we're going to find that out this summer real quick in terms of what talent they acquire. And some people don't feel like this was the right first step, but the draft will be an interesting litmus test to see, okay, how do they continue to scout? Is there a guy or a couple guys that they come out of this draft with that people look at and go, oh, that was a savvy move? Because people felt like that with Ryan Dunn last year, right? You move back, you get Ryan Dunn, you move up and you get Oso Ighodaro, and people thought, oh, those were some savvy draft night moves. Does it feel like that on Wednesday and Thursday, for that matter, in the second round? Like, that's what I'm looking at. Look, I'm the first to admit I'm not a big draft head. I barely have enough time to watch NBA basketball, let alone 136 college basketball teams, and try to figure that out. I leave it to smarter guys like Steven to understand fit and stuff. But from that larger perspective, that's what I need to understand on Wednesday is, does it appear that they walked away getting the value that you need at 10 to win, or do you wind up getting the future Jalen Smith, right? Like, is that where you wind up? And we won't know that on Wednesday, but we'll know kind of how everybody feels on Wednesday. So buckle up.
Not to take a page out of Eric's book, but a legacy draft for Brian Gregory coming up, considering he was given a lot of credit in that press release for being responsible for the Ryan Dunn and the Oso Ighodaro draft evaluation. So we're gonna get another look at his draft evaluating talents at number 10 and at number 27, and potentially somewhere else if they trade up or down.
Look,
and even more so at 52 and 59, because if you're hailing this dynamic in particular, acknowledging that people are going to speak in experience, if you say that his knowledge and awareness and connections in terms of networking of everything on a collegiate level is what it is, and Espo, you bring it up to no top 5, top 8, top 9 picks being in the finals this year. There's a litany of pieces that are mainstays in the rotation and even starting for both teams that were found in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Gregory, you're being held for your attention to detail and understanding of collegiate level and assessing NBA talent maybe sooner than other pieces can across the NBA. This is your time to shine right here. It feels like there's a lot of gems out there, but it just takes the right eye to understand what context you will be bringing that piece into. You're up to bat now. You are not on deck in any capacity anymore, and the draft is literally right around the corner. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to do and what he ultimately does in his first opportunity, like you said, Gerald, and what Eric said, even more so, in a legacy draft to come for Brian Gregory.
Yeah, I can definitely say that this will be the most important draft that Brian Gregory's ever been a general manager for. No need to report with sources. I can tell you that specifically. And by the way, Hello says, Espo just said Steven doesn't have a busy life so he can watch college basketball. That was not what I was saying. I was trying to say Steven's more dedicated to the craft than I am when it comes to understanding the prospects and the inner workings of the game. It was a compliment, Steven, not an insult. I hope you know that.
No, Espo was saying I watch entirely too much basketball, and that's the role that I'm leaning into here. That's what he was saying.
Absolutely.
Steven, can I ask one thing before we go? We hear a lot of backlash that Suns ownership takes, but then we are hearing a lot of praise that the same group is taking for what the Mercury are doing. Is there anything we look at that the Mercury have done that may play into this offseason because they're one big happy family? It may be a dumb question, but that seems to be this weird thing I can't wrap my mind around, and you're the expert. So
that's a layered question. I'll kind of get into it as quickly as I can. The first one being a relationship between the franchise player and head coach. Everything is gonna balance off of the tone that those two, that independent faction sets. On the Mercury side, Khalil Copper and Nate Tibbetts. Obviously, with the Suns, they have a brand new coach, literally in the head coach in Jordan Ott and Devin Booker. The vibe that they're on is going to be the vibe that everybody else can kind of bounce off of or ascend from. If that's not high, then you can't expect for the team to be vibrating at a high frequency. If it is high and it's not the fluff, it's not the fake, it's got to be an authentic, genuine, really organic type of relationship established. If that hits, then everything else is going to be able to even exceed potential expectations because of that in particular. So those two having a shared vision and stand #aligned is going to be everything for this team. And then you look past that, you look at the Mercury in this season that they're in, which is their second best start in the franchise's history. Being able to do a lot with not having a lot on your on the draft pick side. Now, obviously, the Suns just erased the not having a lot side, but you have some late picks this season. What do you do with those? Because the Mercury didn't have any picks. And all of these undrafted rookies that they brought in, they have 2 that are in the starting lineup for them right now. One of which producing at a borderline all-star level of play at the point guard position. And then another that's been more than above average starting caliber center. Can you find ways to bring pieces that maybe not be viewed with the most talent, but fit for your team and that can play complementary off of the system I was establishing and everything that Devin Booker is as an individual player? If you do that diligence and you hit grand slams on the margins, which is what the Mercury did, not just in the talent, but also the people, the character of these people you're bringing into your franchise, again, that retool that can be daunting for Suns fans to hear might only be one season. And that one season retool might be one where they finish in the first round and they might exceed expectations and might go through the play-in, but you finish in the first round. I don't feel like that's something that a lot of people are expecting from this team. So attention to detail in each of those 3 things, and they could potentially be where people might not expect them to be.
Absolutely. I think that's going to do it for us here in this emergency pod, breaking down the Kevin Durant trade from pretty much every angle imaginable. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to leave us a like on the way out, subscribe so that you know whenever we are going live for events just like this. You can follow Steven at StevenPG3, breaking down PHNX Suns and Mercury throughout the week. You can follow Espo at Espo. You can follow me at Gerald Bourget, and you can follow the Suns at PHNX_Suns. We haven't been able to say this in a while, but Espo, take us home.
I give the deal an F. I just realized we didn't get Jock back. No! Ahoy, hoy.
We all silly like the mayor.